The slap echoed louder than the engine of the Ferrari, sharper than the gasp of the crowd, and heavier than the silence that followed. In a single reckless moment, arrogance rose its hand against age, wealth struck humility, and a powerful man believed his money could erase his cruelty. 5 minutes later, as fate unfolded with cruel precision, that same hand would tremble with regret he could never undo. Before the story deepens, take a moment to pause. If you believe in kindness, in second chances, and in the quiet power of humility, please like this video, share it with someone who needs hope today, comment your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel to support stories that remind us of our humanity. The man who delivered that slap was named Jonathan Reed, a 36-year-old tech millionaire who had built his fortune in Silicon Valley before moving to Chicago to enjoy the spoils of success. His life was measured in numbers, market shares, and luxury possessions that validated his sense of superiority. That morning, sunlight glistened across the polished red body of his Ferrari as it rested outside a historic courthouse in downtown Illinois. The car was more than transportation. It was a statement, a shield, and a reminder to the world that Jonathan Reed had arrived above everyone else. He stood nearby in a tailored suit, checking his phone, detached from the ordinary people walking past him. Among those people was an elderly black man named Samuel Carter, a man whose back bent slightly under the weight of years, whose hands bore the marks of labor, and whose eyes carried stories no one bothered to hear anymore. Samuel had been a mechanic once, decades ago, before factories closed and life grew harder. He lived in a small rented room nearby and walked the streets each day, finding comfort in memories of machines he once fixed with pride. As he passed the Ferrari, he paused, drawn by the curve of its design and the precision of its engineering. His weathered fingers lightly brushed the edge of the car, not in ownership, not in entitlement, but in admiration, like an artist touching a finished masterpiece. That was when Jonathan turned around. In his world, nothing he owned was allowed to be touched without permission. His mind did not register Samuel as a person, only as a threat to property, a stain on his perfect morning. Without hesitation, without thought, Jonathan stepped forward and struck Samuel across the face. The slap was sudden, humiliating, and violent. Samuel staggered back, stunned, his glasses falling to the pavement, his dignity shattering in front of strangers who froze in disbelief. The street fell into a tense stillness, broken only by Samuel's labored breathing as he struggled to stay upright. Jonathan felt justified. In his mind, wealth had granted him authority, and authority excused cruelty. He adjusted his cufflinks, turned away, and dismissed the moment as insignificant. He had no idea that the next 5 minutes would dismantle everything he believed about power, respect, and consequence. Samuel did not shout or retaliate. He knelt slowly to retrieve his glasses, his hands trembling not from fear but from a familiar ache of injustice he had known all his life. A woman named Grace Thompson, a local social worker, rushed to help him, her face pale with anger and concern. As she supported Samuel, something inside his chest tightened. Years of stress, long walks, and untreated pain converged into a sharp pressure. His breath shortened, his vision blurred, and his body began to fail him right there on the concrete sidewalk. People gathered as Samuel collapsed, his body giving in to a heart attack brought on by shock and humiliation. Someone called for help. Sirens wailed in the distance. Jonathan, who had been scrolling through his phone, looked up just in time to see paramedics racing toward the crowd surrounding the man he had just struck. For the first time, uncertainty crept into his expression. As the paramedics worked frantically, Grace explained through tears what had happened. Witnesses confirmed it. Phones were raised, recording not just the emergency, but the truth. Jonathan stood frozen, his Ferrari now irrelevant, his name suddenly whispered with disgust. When the paramedics loaded Samuel into the ambulance, one of them looked at Jonathan with a stare heavy enough to crush pride. Samuel was rushed to the hospital in critical condition, his life hanging by a fragile thread. News traveled fast. Within minutes, videos spread online. The headline was unforgiving. A millionaire assaults elderly man outside courthouse. Jonathan's phone began vibrating non-stop, but now it was not praise or profit calling him. It was consequence. Sponsors withdrew. Board members demanded explanations. His carefully built image cracked as the world saw him not as a visionary, but as a bully. At the hospital, Samuel was stabilized but unconscious. His condition was serious, and doctors warned that the next few hours would decide everything. Jonathan, driven by something unfamiliar that felt like fear mixed with shame, found himself standing in the hospital hallway. The echo of his slap replayed in his mind louder than before. For the first time in years, money offered no solution. As he waited, Jonathan learned more about Samuel. A nurse named Michael Barnes shared bits of his life without realizing the weight they carried. Samuel had raised 2 children alone after his wife passed away. He volunteered at a local church food pantry when his health allowed. He fixed broken bikes for neighborhood kids for free. The man Jonathan saw as nothing more than a threat to his car was, in truth, a pillar quietly holding up a corner of the world. 5 minutes had passed since the slap, but the regret was only beginning. Jonathan felt smaller than he ever had in his penthouse office. When Samuel finally regained consciousness hours later, Jonathan was not allowed to see him. He did not deserve that forgiveness yet. Days passed. The story remained viral. Jonathan issued apologies, donated money, but none of it erased the image of his hand striking a man who only wanted to admire beauty. Something inside him shifted. He sold the Ferrari. He stepped down from his company. He began volunteering anonymously at shelters and repair shops, learning humility through service rather than applause. Samuel survived. Recovery was slow, but his spirit remained intact. He never spoke publicly about the incident, choosing peace over attention. Months later, Jonathan saw him again. Not on a street, but at the food pantry where Jonathan now spent his weekends stacking boxes. Their eyes met briefly, and in that silent moment, Jonathan understood the true cost of arrogance. If this story touched your heart, if it made you reflect on how we treat others, please take a moment now to like this video, share it with someone who needs a reminder, and subscribe to the channel to keep stories like this alive. Before this story ends, we have a special request for you. Please comment below with one word that describes how this story made you feel. Your words matter more than you know. Jonathan Reed learned that day that respect is not bought, that dignity is not disposable, and that the smallest act of cruelty can unravel a lifetime of success. And somewhere in a quiet Chicago neighborhood, an old man named Samuel Carter continued walking, reminding the world that true strength is gentle and true wealth is kindness.